The column 2 input method is a good tool for you to use for elements that have kind of uneven sides, or elements where you don't really want to pair the points together because it's going to make it too hard to match up. So let's look at how to use a column 2 very, very effectively. So I'm going to open columns.bmp, which is located in the graphics folder in the designs folder that's loaded with your software. I'm going to open that up. This is something that a design that we've used to teach how to digitize with column tools quite frequently. And like I said in the column 1 video, choosing the type of tool that you want to input with really is more dependent upon how you want to digitize than anything else. It used to be very much tied to, I choose this tool for this stitch type. That's not the case anymore. So choose the tool that's going to generate the type of stitches that you want to in the way that you want to. So if you want to tie your stitches, your stitch direction together as you input a point or input a shape, use a column 1. That's going to be great for that. If you have something where you don't want those sides to be tied and you don't want to deal with stitch direction until later, choose a column 2 or a complex fill input method for that, and that will work well for that. If the shape doesn't have a hole, then column 1 or a column 2 can probably do it for like the letter S or something like that. For something with a hole, you'll need to use multiple elements to do that. For like an A or an E, you'll need multiple column tools or column elements to do that. Whereas with a complex fill, you could do it kind of all in one. So use the tool that fits how you want to digitize. And for me, a column 2 is really, really great when I am changing stitch directions throughout a form, but I have kind of uneven sides that I need to take care of. So that's what we're going to look at here and how to do that. It digitizes very differently than a column 1. So if you're used to column 1, it may throw you a bit. If you're used to column 2, column 1 may throw you a little bit. So use the one that you like for you. All right, so I've opened this design. In the previous video that I recorded, I did not size this. I'm going to size it now. I'm just going to take this to 2.5 inches and we're going to zoom in a little bit. That's going to make things easier for you when I start looking at stitches in 3D. The column 2 is located underneath the column 1 typically. If I click and hold on this tool, I can go to the fly out and grab my column 2. Now the big difference, column 1 deals in pairs of points. Column 2, you do all of one side and then you do all of the other side. So for something like this, I'm going to left click, go all the way down one side, left click, and then I hit enter, and then I go up and I do the other side in the same direction. Don't go around your design. Left click, and I'm going to hit enter again. So you do one side, hit enter, do the other side, hit enter, and now it's asking for my stitch direction lines. So I can, if I like what they have, I can just click on one of the edges and it will input my stitch direction. But you definitely want to have a stitch direction for every element. If I don't, I can click and drag across the form to change my stitch direction. So you've got that capability as well. This looks a little bit weird. Again, typically I like to have my stitches falling to some extent perpendicular to the edge. I like to have them going across the form. It's going to give it the most sculptural effect, and it's also going to give you kind of the smoothest sew out. There are times I break those rules, but it's not that often. All right, so let's look at this piece. So here, I'm going to do one side. I'm going to do the inside first. It doesn't matter. You could do the outside first. Left click, right click, left click, hit enter. So I moved from left to right, so I'm going to do the same thing. Whoa, sorry. I'm going to do the same thing again. Left, right, left, hit enter. And now I'm going to give it a stitch direction line that's going to give it all the information it needs. And right now I have my underlay set to auto, so it is automatically generating that underlay. That's not a bad way to go. but it definitely generates it much more effectively when the element has a stitch direction line. So again, try not to have elements without stitch direction lines somewhere. If you like what it has and how it's generating, just click on an edge and it will keep all of that, but give it a stitch direction line that lines up with it. For something, for something like this S, where it's changing throughout the form, you'll want to kind of subdivide these. I'm going to use a vector line to do that, so I'm going to come across here. I'm probably going to want to transition about there and about there. And then let's divide this in half. You could do it in thirds, but and then half again, so quarters. It's just easier sometimes to do it this way. Again, I try not to exceed 180 degrees between any pairs. All right, so now I'm going to grab my column tool. So I'm just using that vector tool as guides for myself. A lot of times what I would do is print this out and draw it on a piece of paper. So if you don't have the vector tool, that's completely an option for you. Print it out, draw across it. I've just got it on screen so that you guys can see it. After I've been doing this for 20 years, I do a lot of this mentally, but every now and then I will plan it out on screen a little bit. All right, so let's grab this. Column 2, we've got it. So I'm going to start over here and I'm going to do all of one side. Left, right, 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 right. Nope. I should have done a left because that's a pretty strong transition. So I'm going to backspace 1. I'm going to put a left click in here. Left, right, 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 left to end it. Hit enter, and then you'll notice that there's a line that connects it. So this is going to be my end. Left, going the same direction, right, right. They don't have to be in the same place. They don't have to be pairs of points. They don't even have to have the same number. So this time I'm going to put even more, even though normally I wouldn't. I just want to have a different number. Or just in very different places, I guess. Hit enter. And now I've got my stitches that are trying very hard to transition between all of this, but they could use a little bit of help. Give it a stitch direction that's going to work well for you. So I'm going to come across the form here, click and drag, and across the form here, click and drag. And then everything else straightened out, so I'm kind of okay with where everything else is. So with a column 2, you do all of one side, hit enter, all of the other side, hit enter, as many stitch directions as you want, and then hit enter, and you're done with that shape. All right, so let's look at how to deal with these forms. So again, these are going to have multiple elements. I'm going to use a vector line to divide this out for me so it shows up on screen for you. I'm going to divide this E into kind of that crossbar and the rest. I'm going to pull the crossbar differently than the legs on this A. And then what I may choose to do is when we were doing this A with a column 1, I did it 2 different ways. I'm going to do it a 3rd way with column 2. And I'm going to break that top piece off into kind of a little hat that kind of sits on there. So let's go through that and look at that. So with this piece, I will go all across the outside. I'm holding Alt to keep all of those at 15-degree increments. And then all across the inside, same direction. Hit enter, and then I'm going to give it stitch directions, and I might choose to give it a few more. If you want to kind of tighten up your stitch directions, you can do that. I can come across here and it's going to add that in either place. And then I'm going to go across here. I'm also holding Alt. That was a bit tight. Let me delete that and do it again. So if you screw up, wow, that's really not the stitch direction I would want, you can click on the end of one, it highlights in silver, and then hit delete on your keyboard and it goes away. So I'm going to drag this across there. That's looking a little bit closer to what I want. And then let's go ahead and bump this out just a touch. And I will move my exit point in to here so that I can do this middle part of the E. And you could digitize the segments separately. Here I like the stitch direction, so I'm just going to click on the line and it's going to adopt the stitch direction that's right where I click. You could digitize all of this separately if you wanted to. You could digitize your own walk travel stitches, but because this is all within one element, as far as this crossbar, I can move my entry point over to the last stitch of the previous element and it will generate its own travel stitch. Completely an option for you. It's just how much do you want to digitize and how much do you want to edit. If you want to do everything as you go, then you would need to break it apart into multiple columns even yet. The outside piece would be 2. You would do one piece and then change to a walk and travel up and then change to a column and travel, or satin back down, and then change to a walk, go to the outside, change to a column, travel back in. So that was what, 5 pieces, and I just did it in 2. So it's how many pieces you want and how much do you want to edit later. All right, let's look at this A. All right, so let's do this leg first. So I'm going to come up here in this. I started to notice in the last session I did kind of bowed a little bit, so I am going to put a point there. And I'm going to go up the outside. Now, I want to exit on the inside, and I just had my last point on the outside. Kind of bad planning on my part. Does it really matter? No. If I hit enter, it will exit wherever my last point was, but if I hold control and hit enter, it will exit on the inside. And that is what I want. So I hold control, hit enter, and you'll notice that the exit point's now on the same side as my start. Let's bow this out slightly. So I'll come back to that. And now what I want to do is I'm going to do this end, hit enter, do the other side, hit enter, give it a stitch direction. I'm going to move my entry point down so that it travels up and sews back down to end here, creating that little cap. And then come down one side, then the other, give it a stitch direction. I'm going to edit this little bump. Sometimes you don't have to. If this was sewing later, you might not need it. Just be careful about your stitch directions and how much it's going to pull a gap in stitches that it sews over. And then let's do this crossbar, one side, then the other. Hit enter, give it a stitch direction, hit enter to finish the piece. And if you are getting lost, you can always pay attention to the bar down here. Hold on. So as I'm digitizing, you've got, this bar, now that I'm in the middle of it, you can see it. This bar down here will tell you what you're doing. So if I escape out of this and we go down here, it's saying input first point. So I would do one side. And here's a really great example of different numbers. So here's one side. It says input next point or hit enter to finish element. So I hit enter. And now it's asking for the other side. And here I'm going to do 2 points. Hit enter. Now it's asking to left click and drag for stitch direction, or right click for input or for end points. That's going to be more for your complex fills than your columns. Your columns generate their endpoints on their own by the last 2 points, or by the first and last point of each side. All right, so now let's look at dealing with this guy. This one's always one of the trickier letters / numbers to deal with when it has kind of a thick, thin play, because your curves are always going to be different. So I'm going to start, I typically start around here, and I'm going to come around and then go up the side, and I'm kind of subdividing each curve. And how am I doing that? Well, let's hit escape and let's use a vector line so you can kind of see what's in my head, because that's about the only way you're going to understand what's in there. So I typically divide small curves and big curves. So I would divide this into kind of 4 pieces. And this may not work. I may have to adjust it, but that's about what I do, and you're going to pretend that those are perfectly even. If they're not, you can definitely adjust them. You, of course, will take more time and do better than I. And then I divide, so let's do this in a different color. Let's do pink. So I also will think about dividing those. And then if I can make this in one perfect arc, I will. If I can't, I may have to kind of think about my curve points and subdivide these again. So I will come across here. And I don't think I'm going to be able to make that work. No, it gets kind of funny. It just goes in and out. So let's maybe subdivide that up again. So I will do here and then here, here, and then here, and I'm just right-clicking my way around. And then I will left-click for the end, hit enter, and I'll do the same thing over here. Same direction. Don't trace around, because it'll bow tie this, and that'll be really nasty. All right, so left, right, right, and then we figured out before that I can't pull this off like I thought, so I'm going to right-click, right, right. I did not get that as even as I thought I did. Right, you're going to go around the form. Again, we're dividing this up a little bit. With this, you can dictate the stitch direction later, so don't stress too much if your points don't look like spokes on a wheel. That's less of a concern with this one because, again, you're dictating your stitch directions later. So I drag my stitch direction across the form. If I don't particularly like how that's fanning, I can move that as well. Add where you need to add, take away where you need to take away, and edit your shape if you need to, but that's going to give you kind of that nice thick thin 0 or O kind of shape. And I did that, again, mentally subdividing those up. Now we come to this one. And this one is just all kinds of fun because you have curves and angles and none of the sides are the same, and that's just going to be super fun to deal with. So you have options here. You can try to digitize and make everything line up, or you can digitize all of one side, all of the other, and then edit those back in, which is typically what I would do. So if I want my sides to line up exactly, it is not uncommon for me to do all of one side, hold Alt, I'm going to do all of the other side, so that all of those straight parts are completely level with each other and exactly the same. And then I will go back in and edit in my curves. I'm holding Alt to arc out perfectly. It would really help if I would have gotten that a little more on point. There we go. Just nudge it a little bit. And to nudge, I am when I have something selected, if you want to just nudge it a little bit with your arrow keys, you can do that. Just hold Shift and use the arrow keys and it will move 1 point at a time. If you use Shift and Alt, it will move 10. If you use Shift and Control, it will move 100. So I'm just going to edit these back in. Notice that I do each side first before I move the middle, because that will keep my lower lines completely even with each other. And you will, of course, take more time, be more zoomed in, and be far more accurate than I am. If I'm not doing this for a video where I'm trying to be quick, I do take a little bit more time with my stuff. And then I speed up the other parts using keyboard shortcuts and things of that like. Now that I'm done kind of modifying that shape, do I need to tweak my stitch directions? Yeah, maybe a little. So you can go back in and use your stitch direction editing tool to come back in and edit stitch directions where you feel you need to. But column 2 is definitely handy for those shapes that have those uneven sides and you don't want or can't have your stitches lining up so much. So now that you've got a little bit better grasp of column 2, you can tackle those forms where, again, your sides are uneven, you can't really deal with your stitch directions as you digitize, or for some of those more organic shapes. So get in there, play with it. Remember, one side, enter, the other side, enter, moving in the same direction, and then give it your stitch direction, hit enter, and you're done with your shape.